This is going to be my third video about transferring to an Ivy League. The first was tactically about the application. The second is mostly tactical questions that were asked to me that are follow-ups. And then finally, this is 2 years post-transferring. What perspective do I have now? Feel free to skip to any question that you think is interesting. This question is, was applying worth it? Okay, even if I had not been accepted, I still believe the answer would be yes, because you don't then have to regret or wonder what would have been had you taken an alternative path, as in had you applied. To be honest, reflecting on this question, I realized that prior to that point in my life, I have so rarely allowed myself to be in the position to be rejected. For example, something I have not admitted is that the reason why I never applied to any of the Ivies to begin with was because I panicked and I was so deeply, honestly depressed and upset in the semester that I was applying to colleges that I didn't feel able to even apply to any of these schools that I thought I had a good chance of being rejected at. All of that is to say, applying to transfer was one of the first times in my life that I was like really putting myself out there to be rejected, and it was one of the times where I learned to be a little bit braver, and that's a theme that I'm taking 2 years onwards, and for the next chapter of my life, I'd like to learn to be a little bit braver. I think that's a much better quality than trying to be a little bit more perfect. The spiciest question I have in here is, should you transfer from a worse ranked school to a better ranked school, even though, for example, you've set up your life at the worst ranked school? And it's spicy in the sense that I think it's a pretty taboo topic, because we're all like, everything is equal, but it is not equal. And I think better than a lot of people, because I've transferred from a school that was canonically ranked worse to a school that was canonically ranked better. A lot of Harvard students, for example, would say like, oh, we don't get that much of an advantage, and that is just a lie. What you get from going to a top tier school in terms of branding is people just give you the benefit of the doubt. So for example, career-wise, people will give you the benefit of the doubt that you're probably pretty smart, that you can figure it out, that you're well qualified for this job, etc. Some jobs are even more discriminate about this or explicit about this, where, for example, when you apply into their applicant tracking system, they will just filter the applicants by people who came from certain schools. Another casual benefit that you get, for example, is they have specific recruiters for Harvard. Another really explicit example is, I'm thinking of a company, it's a consulting firm, where they just save spots for Harvard students for the New York office, for example. All of that is to say, you get the benefit of the doubt when you go to a better ranked school. Socially, you also get the benefit of the doubt because people just assume you're smart. Now, this is not to say that other people are not as smart as people who go to certain schools, but it is to say that they will have to prove it through hard work, grinding, etc., while others just get it kind of laid out because of the school they went to. It is very unfair, but that is the reality of the situation. That is what I would tell a friend, so that's what I'm telling you. So, was it hard to be a transfer student? I actually have quite a different perspective now that I'm 2 years out versus when I was there. When I was there, I thought it was easier than it was. In hindsight, I would say socially, it was actually a lot more challenging than I expected. In your first year, you can still use the excuse that you're new and you just transferred, which is why you don't have any friends, not because you don't have any friends. And that works for a while, but at some point, which is like really year 2, you are expected to sort of socially be at the same level as other people, even though you missed out on super crucial social experiences. I would say 2 things that really hurt me in terms of socially. Not to complain, I had lots of other things to my benefit, but 2 things that really hurt me socially that I would not recommend you do is, first, I didn't have a big roommate group that I transferred into. Some of my transfer friends did, but I transferred to a room with 2 people, one of which I did not get along with, one of which I did get along with, and then the person that I did get along with, when in our next year we decided to live together, but they ended up living in like a different creative house. All that is to say, we were no longer roommates, so I was living in a single. Living in a single as a transfer student is so rough because so much of your support system comes from roommates and so much of your friends comes from friends of friends. And so if you can, try to transfer into a big room, honestly. Increases your probability of knowing a lot of great people. The second thing that I did that was a mistake was I transferred into a small house and got along really well with everyone. And in my first year, I felt like I could go to the dining hall at any time and sit down with most people in the hall. And it was great. And then I transferred out of that house. It's kind of a long story as to how that happened, but that was a mistake and that was something I shouldn't have done. Um, Already transferring puts you at a disadvantage in terms of opportunity to have known people and to have built up those relationships. To then do something as drastic as changing houses really refreshes this cycle of trying to meet people all over again. And senior year, that's particularly hard because seniors tend to be the most closed off because they just want to solidify relationships that they have already built. Prioritize depth of friendship as opposed to breadth of friendship. That was a mistake on my part. What did I lose out on from leaving NYU? I would say probably most relevant to you all is I lost out on the ability to graduate early or even graduate on time. I've answered in my FAQ video why that was the case. And I do think if you're someone who is really adamant about graduating early or graduating on time, transferring might be quite challenging, especially after your second year, which is what I did. In terms of friendships, I actually feel quite lucky that I don't feel like I lost out on that much opportunity to deepen my relationship. I think that's specific a bit to NYU and my circumstance because a lot of people kept studying abroad and that's what I would have done anyways, so I would have left my friends for big periods of time anyways. Also, there was a lot of drama with them in junior and senior year and I'm glad I avoided that. And we ended up in the same cities after we graduated, so we just picked up where we left off. I also lost out on Taylor Swift at my graduation. What did I lose out on from Harvard for not being there freshman and sophomore year? I think in terms of your social life or building up relationships, freshman and sophomore year are probably more important than junior and senior year. So for example, at Harvard specifically, all of the freshmen live in one place and then sophomore through seniors live elsewhere. And so I missed out on living in the yard freshman year and that was really rough because a lot of people made a lot of their friends there. And very crucially, they decided their blocking group, AKA their roommates, during that time. So, as I've said earlier, missing out on kind of built-in support systems like the people that you lived with freshman year or, roommates is really tricky because often the way that you make friends is through friends of those people, and not having that felt quite alienating. I felt like I missed out on a lot. Also, in terms of extracurriculars and clubs, how it usually works is all the clubs want freshmen because they're plentiful, they're very open to being manipulated. They're open to being recruited. And then in sophomore and in junior year, those freshmen become leadership, and then leadership transfers that usually in senior year. All of that is to say, if you come in as a junior, it's not very worthwhile for them to recruit you into these positions because you're just going to transfer the year after. And so I think you also lose out on a fair amount. At least I felt like I lost out on a fair amount in terms of clubs because I transferred when I did. Also, this is totally my own fault, but I felt like I couldn't explore clubs and friendships in terms of breadth as much as I wanted to because I was short on time. I wanted to kind of get it right and I had more of a sense of who I was. I was mostly limiting myself to like technology, entrepreneurship, those types of clubs and opportunities and people subsequently because I had already known something about myself and I felt like I had such a short amount of time, I should get it right. But I do feel like I missed out on a lot of exploring as a result of that, had I come as a freshman or as a sophomore. Was it actually a fresh start? Actually, yes. I think this is somewhat surprising, but the person I would have been had I started at Harvard the whole time is very different from the person I was because I transferred. And I like the person that I was because I transferred much better. In other words, I got to develop myself at NYU. In other words, I really, really chilled out from how I was in high school. And then people at Harvard just assumed that that's how I always was, which was actually quite nice. So if that's something you're looking for, it's largely something you get by transferring. I switched majors from business and political economy to CS and philosophy, so I totally changed what I was doing. And the question is, was it worth it to switch majors? I'd say there are major pros and cons. Ultimately, it was completely worth it because when you are a freshman, you know so little about what is out there and so little about yourself and therefore what type of career or aspirations you want to move towards. For myself, I didn't know anything about tech going in. So ultimately, I feel really lucky that I was able to switch majors because that is so much of a better representation of who I am and what I want to do in the future. However, I will say that there are major cons to switching majors, which should not discourage you, but you should just be aware of them. One of which is you're probably going to learn things at more of breadth and less depth than had you just been studying the same thing for 4 years. That's pretty obvious. One of the consequences of this, for example, for myself, is I'm much more insecure about the majors that I ended up studying because I feel like I know them less well than all the people who studied them for 4 years. But I do feel like I'm a well-rounded person who was able to learn on my own for a variety of subjects because I had the chance to learn the basics for all of them. So, major pros and cons, but it should not discourage you from moving towards something that's more authentic for you or a better fit for you. Are you too behind to switch majors? So I only have the experience of transferring into a liberal arts school, and if you're transferring into a liberal arts school, the answer is definitely no, because one, if they accepted you then and you're allowed to switch majors, it's because they know that you are capable of doing that. They've seen it happen before. And two, at least at Harvard, many of the classes are not that grade specific. They're actually more, subject specific, meaning that if you are a junior in a freshman class, you're not like, oh wow, look at all of these babies. It's more normal. People don't think it's that weird. They understand. I will say, because I switched majors and I wanted to graduate close enough to on time, the consequence was that I really pushed myself in terms of course load, many times almost doubling my course load, which I would definitely not recommend. Well, I would just say there's a huge cost to it. And the cost to it is that there are so many parties you don't go to, there are so many events you don't go to, therefore there are so many people you don't meet, there's so many friendships you don't make, and that is something that you take on, a cost you take on for the benefits that you take on. More broadly, how did it impact my life? I want to talk about things that people say less often. So obviously people are going to say that anything you do changes the course of your life, and yet you're kind of the same person. This is all true. But the things that are less said, I would say, are one, Harvard actually made me less anxious because I felt like I checked off more boxes as a Chinese immigrant. I was like, oh, I've actually done a lot of things that immigrant parents want you to do, and that gave me some amount of comfort and confidence, as much as I don't want to admit that. It's true. I also benefit from being given the benefit of the doubt, although I have a lot of gratitude towards it because I know what it was like to not have that as much. I feel really lucky that I got to make friends from both schools because ultimately that's probably what the degree means to me, is the people that I meet that I get to hang out with, on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis, because your experience at that school will end, but your experience with those people don't have to end. I'm gonna leave you with something which is, what did I not gain essentially from transferring? And that is, I did not learn how to take a risk because I ended up going to a school where you feel like you have something to lose, which is totally silly because you never do except your own time. And so all of that is to say, I really want to emphasize that what I would like to be in the future is braver. And I didn't learn that from either school. This is my personal 2-year post-graduating and post-transferring reflection. I hope bits of it was useful or interesting to you. I'm not the wisest, it's just kind of where I am in my life right now. But see you in my next video.